All right, so we are starting to discuss the first of the glial cells. So we've been talking about the axons, and now we're transitioning to the first of the glial cells, and we are in the peripheral nervous system. We'll talk about two different types of glial cells in the peripheral nervous system, and then after that, we're going to talk about four different kinds of glial cells in the central nervous system. So when we are looking at large peripheral nervous system neurons, and I showed you that picture of the regenerating axon, and I said, look at those things that look like a roll of paper towels. So if you think about that roll of paper towels, there's a hole in the middle, right? And so it goes around the axon. And when you talk about the large peripheral nervous system neurons, what you have is you have the Schwann cell wraps round and round and round, kind of like if you take that roll of paper towels and unroll it, it'll be really, really long. Sometimes your cat might do that, or a dog with toilet paper maybe, but it's the same idea. So in large peripheral nervous system neurons, the Schwann cell is wrapped round and round and round the axon, and you have a lot of them. When I was showing you that picture, you have 1, 2, 3, they're crammed all along the axon, and they contain something called myelin. So what it is it's an insulating material. So if we think of neurons kind of like electricity, in the next couple of lectures, I'll be talking about what a nerve transmission is, and it does involve movement of ions. So you can kind of think of it like electricity, which is the movement of electrons. It's a little bit different, but regardless. When you think of this, so you can think of the myelin as being an insulating layer around the nerve. Now, I'm going to show you this picture here. So you see, we can see 3 Schwann cells there. And you notice that there's a label right here, nodes of Ranvier. That's what they call them. It's a fancy name for a gap between Schwann cells. And the reason we name that gap is it plays a really important role. So what happens is the nerve transmission, rather than going, doink, 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 all the way down the axon, it jumps from node to node in large peripheral nervous system axons. So it'll be something that we'll talk about being saltatory conduction, and it's a very fast way of sending the signal down the axon, and it involves jumping from node to node, nodes of Ranvier. So it involves jumping down there, and it allows for a very rapid transmission of the nerve impulse, communication. All right. Now, but what about those small axons? If you are a little teeny tiny axon, what you are, instead of having the Schwann cell wrapped around and around and around you, there's a groove on the outside of the Schwann cell that you are laying in. And so as a result of that, you're not actually covered up. You don't have a node of Ranvier. You do have, one Schwann cell after another, but your entire surface of the axon is exposed. So in those axons, you don't have this jumping kind of conduction, and we'll talk about that in detail later. You have what we call a continuous conduction, where the change in the ions has to pass through all of the surface, all of the membrane, the cell membrane on the surface of the axon. And so it's a slower conduction pathway. All right, so let's see. Okay, so on slide 17, I think it is, you can see what they call unmyelinated, it's a mouthful for me today, unmyelinated axons in the Schwann cell. And you can see that if you look carefully at that picture, you can see that and we're talking about this part right here, on the surface you can see there's an axon. What do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4 of them in grooves on that part right there. And so these are the small axons, and we call them unmyelinated, but they still are connected and associated with a Schwann cell. So even though small axons in the peripheral nervous system are called unmyelinated, they're connected to Schwann cells. I know. Everything is... Why couldn't they make it simpler? Oh, well. What can you say? All right, we have another kind of glial cell. So what is it? That's the first glial cell that we've talked about in the peripheral nervous system. What is it? Yeah, Schwann cell. You got it. And the second one is going to be a satellite cell. So a satellite cell is found associated with the cell bodies of peripheral nervous system neurons. So if you are a afferent neuron, that means that your cell body is going to be out near the sensory structure. So you're going to have your soma is going to be out away from your central nervous system. Soma meaning the cell body. And when we get to the central nervous system, we'll talk about a type of glial cell that functions in helping to protect the neuron from any kind of toxins that you might have come in contact with and are transporting through your circulatory system. So that's what a satellite cell does. But it's not in the central nervous system. It's way out there somewhere, associated with the cell body of a afferent sensory peripheral nervous system cell. And what is it going to do? One of the major roles is to protect the cell body from toxicity by heavy metals. So it's screening the material that might make its way to the peripheral nervous system neuron there. And as we had said, the poor satellite cell, if it gets exposed to heavy metal toxins, it might die. It's okay. They're mitotic. They're replaced. The peripheral nervous system cell will not be. So their job is to prevent those toxins from killing that peripheral nervous system neuron. And so basically they're kind of like a go-between between the circulatory system. Now what's being transported in the circulatory system? Nutrients, right? So the stuff that is needed by the cell, it passes through the satellite cell on its way to the neuron, and the satellite protects it from all that bad stuff. Yeah, okay. So those are the two glial cells of the peripheral nervous system. We got at least one more lecture. We're going to talk about 4 more different kinds of glial cells, but these are in the central nervous system.